Just ahead on American Black Journal, Detroit is home to a large number of African American entrepreneurs. We're going to get some expert advice on starting and growing a business, and we'll talk about the resources that are available for business owners. Also, a Detroit woman donates a piece of her history to the National Museum of African American History in Washington. American Black Journal starts right now.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. We're coming to you today from the Detroit Historical Museum, which sits in the midst of an increasingly vibrant Midtown district in Detroit. Some of the growth can be attributed to the large number of entrepreneurs who are setting up shop in the city. When it comes to the number of minority-owned businesses, Detroit is among the top 4 cities in the country. But make no mistake about it, starting and sustaining a business takes a lot of work, a lot of resources and support. Joining me now are 2 people who can offer some very helpful advice to aspiring and existing entrepreneurs. Mark Lee is the president and CEO of the Lee Group, and Kimberly Faison is director of Prosper Us, an initiative of Southwest Solutions. Welcome back, both of you, to American Black Journal.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you both back to talk about this subject. We've gone over this ground before, but it's worth revisiting because this really is the strength of the revitalization that we're seeing here in Detroit. And when you sort of separate out what's happening among African American entrepreneurs from everybody else, you really are starting to see some strength.
Yeah, you know, Detroit is really becoming a mecca for minority-owned businesses. And as you mentioned in your opening comments, we are the 4th largest city in the country. We have over 60,000 small businesses in the city of Detroit. Over 42,000 are African-American owned, minority-owned, and over 30,000 are women-owned businesses. So we're becoming a hotspot, and I think people are coming here and to really start a business. And once you do that, it's going to help you to hire other people. So it becomes an economic engine for the city of Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about when we talk about job creation and employment and opportunity, that neighborhood business, the business that's around the corner from where you live, is really your best opportunity in many cases to get that chance. Black businesses in Detroit are the ones who provide that opportunity.
Absolutely, and you know, like as you mentioned, you know, small businesses create jobs, and as Detroit is going through this revitalization, one of the challenges that we still have is it's not a knock. There's been such a strong emphasis on downtown and midtown. One of the ways we're going to revitalize the neighborhoods will be putting those businesses actually in the neighborhoods where people can work and actually go to work, and certainly hire other individuals as well.
Yeah. Kimberly, tell us about Prosper Us and the work that you guys are doing with small businesses.
Yes, so again, thanks for having us back.
Yeah.
And since the last time that I was able to join you, we have grown tremendously. Our program is extremely neighborhood-based, very grassroots, so it would not be possible for us to do our work if not for the partnership of about 10 different agencies across the city that we work with, who help to recruit Detroit-based talent and host our class. And at this point in time, we've graduated 540 Detroit residents from our class. We have a forever relationship, which means that people can come back for supportive services either on the personal side or professional side. And we also have micro lending, and that's 100% neighborhood based.
Yeah. And what are the things that you see with the people who sort of raise their hand and say, hey, I need help with this, or I'm interested in this, in terms of that optimism about Detroit?
There is a tremendous amount of optimism, but we have also found that when we ask people how engaged they are in the activities that can transform their lives and their communities, they do tell us that they're not as engaged as they would like to be. And so we kind of see that as an opportunity. So when we have our class, we're not just talking about your individual business, but we're talking about building your network. We're talking about building your own community, and how do you do that for the long haul? So the immediate, interest of either developing or expanding a business is one way that we get them in, but pushing on people that they have leadership qualities that can be tapped and that they have a lot of assets that they can offer to other people in the community is another really core principle in the training program.
Yeah. I was saying in the open about how hard it is to start a business, to grow a business, to maintain a business, and the number of people I know who've owned their own businesses, started. I mean, it just confirms that this is not just, well, I'm going to put a shingle out and open the store door and things are going to happen. There's a lot of moving parts that people have to understand before they do it.
The American dream to a lot of people still is to start their own business. And a lot of people don't understand the amount of work it really takes to make that happen. And I get approached, Stephen, a lot by people saying, I got this idea. And I push back on them and I'll say, what is your idea, but how are you going to execute it? So a good first step is to make sure, one, that you have an idea. Number two is that you have an overall strategy, a 3 to 5 year plan. Number three, do you understand your financials? And number four, work with someone such as Kimberly's group or an organization that can help you to flesh out the idea. But it's not an overnight sensation. It takes a long time to really build your business.
Yeah, one of the things I think with new business owners is that real question about, is it failing or is it just not succeeding yet, right?
Yeah.
In those early years, you don't necessarily make money or profit. And so hanging in there and sort of sticking with it is one of those other dynamics that
Absolutely. And let me address that if I could. And this is a statistical fact. Within 5 years, 50% of small businesses will fail.
Will fail.
I have seen estimates that upwards of 80%. So to your point, there's a question of not being successful or succeeding versus one of failing. So in the first couple of years, think about it, if you're pushing it, you may not necessarily be successful, but if you stick with it in the longer term, 3 to 5 years out, you can become successful.
Yeah.
Failure means you might just stop altogether.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm just thinking that your social networks have so much to do with your success. Not only is that psychologically beneficial to have a support group around you, but if you don't know who to talk to when you're in a jam, if you've got a pending IRS question that you really need answered, and you don't have someone in your network to help you with that, you can become stuck. So it's really important for people to have the social capital, not just the financial capital, because the resources and the access to information when you need it is extremely critical.
Yeah.
And it's really important, especially in the African American community, that we do a better job of building that social fabric.
Yeah. One of the other things, of course, for minority businesses, but also other businesses, is that early access to capital, to be able to not just start, but then grow and invest in the business. That's been a problem, I know, in Detroit for a long time. We've had a problem with lending in particular, access to lending, but that's also moving in a more positive direction.
It's moving in a more positive direction, but here's the challenge. And generally speaking, you look at minority-owned businesses relative to the general marketplace, a lot of capital has been passed down within the family. And if you look at within the African American community, we don't have the same level of assets and resources that may be passed down from the family. Whereas the general market, for example, you find more assets being transferred within the family. So therefore,
My dad gives me
absolutely,
$50,000
I've gotten
to
inheritance, whatever the case might be. So they can use those resources to start a business. So therefore, fundamentally, they have access to capital.
If I may
Go ahead.
add to that, so we do micro-lending, and it's non-traditional micro-lending, very neighborhood-focused and high risk. And one of the things that we see, but there are a number of things that we see in terms of financial literacy that play a really critical part and access to capital. And so we
knowing what the landscape looks like, what's available, and what you got to do to apply.
But also looking within, so there's a lot of really uncomfortable conversations that we're having along the way. So we may not be score driven, but we are looking at the credit report, and a lot of times people are looking at that for the first time, or they haven't looked at it in years, and we need to be able to explain at least what's happening on that credit report. So there's that portion of it. the fact that most of the borrowers that we work with have a negative net worth. And so, and that's okay. We are able to take that kind of risk. Most lenders can't. But that's really important to be able to show people what your income looks like and what your debts look like and what your overall lending picture looks like. And so we can overcome some of those barriers.
But something like a negative net worth, I mean, there are a lot of businesses that find themselves, or borrowers who find themselves in those kind of positions.
Yes.
That's nothing to be ashamed of.
No,
is the
absolutely
point, right?
not. It's really critical just to understand what it means and
Right.
how it reflects on you when you want to continue on that lending path.
Yeah.
And so just being able to not only understand what the lenders are looking at, but to understand how your daily decisions in your household impact your business.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the educational process that goes into our lending.
And also, you don't want to mix your personal with the
Oh,
professional.
yes.
With the professionals.
Yeah, a lot of people will take their personal credit cards, if you will, to finance their business. I got to tell you
That's not
that's not a good idea.
No.
It could affect your credit score. It could affect your short and long-term borrowing. So you want to make sure that, to Kimberly's point, that you understand the financials, that you have a plan, as I referenced earlier, but try not to mix your personal with the professional. Not a good idea.
Yeah.
When you look at the city right now and think about the number of businesses that we have and all of those good statistics that we talk about, what are the challenges that are sort of still out there? What do we have to do to really get things moving forward?
One, I really believe is in the area of awareness. So we have so many people in this city starting a business, but one of the challenges is, and I've done a lot of speaking across the city, and people will come to me and say, how can I find out about those programs?
Right.
And I think the first challenge is, a lot of people are excited about Detroit. They want to invest their money and grow businesses here, but there's an awareness issue, an awareness challenge. So if I have an idea, where do I go? What programs are out there that can help me to take my business to the next level? So I think that's a huge challenge that we have short term.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Just to kind of support that, I would say that even staying in touch with our graduates, we find that communication, isn't where we'd like to see it. Sometimes it's a technology issue. Sometimes, again, it's social networks. If we could afford to, put billboards across the city, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But it just isn't feasible. So short of that, we really have to rely on people being able to build up their own social networks and kind of stay connected and stay in the know, so they don't miss out on these really awesome opportunities.
Yeah, you've talked a couple times about this idea of networks, and it seems to me that one of the important things there is, running a business can be a pretty lonely exercise, right?
Absolutely.
You're a little cut off, and connecting with other businesses is a way to address that too.
Yes, I mean, most of our graduates who are running a business are actually home-based.
Yeah, right. You work out of the house, right?
Yes, and that's also very isolating. But it also means that if you're in a position that you don't have a professional space to work, you may not have the opportunity to network with your peers and again get assistance in finding those resources and those opportunities. So access to space and a place to work is really important, and it's an issue that we are
Is that
very
still
much
a real
focused
challenge
on.
here in Detroit?
Yes, and even if it's not, we're not necessarily encouraging that everybody go out and get a commercial space.
Right.
We've seen a lot of mishaps happen around that. But just being able to get into either a shared space or a co-working space is really critical for people to be able to grow and expand.
Yeah.
But also, along that line, it's network. Get out across Detroit. There's so many things happening in the city right now, so many things, organizations focused on entrepreneurship. So you may have a home-based business, but it's okay to get out and explore during the evening hours. Network and have lunches, have coffees. And I think that helps to take that loneliness out of building that business and really creating that network you need to certainly leverage other opportunities.
So if I'm starting a business in Detroit, where do I go? What's the first place I had to go for advice or help?
There's a really good resource. Yes, come to Prosperous Detroit. But there's also a really good resource called the BizGrid. And for people who are very early, it's an awesome opportunity to just explore the landscape in general. It's an opportunity for you to know, okay, well, maybe I'm operational, maybe I've got all my paperwork in order, but it's I just really need to join a trade association, or it's an opportunity for me to access capital. So. That I would highly recommend just seeing the landscape.
All right, Mark Lee, Kimberly Faison, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, coming up next, a look back at an interview with a Detroit woman who's giving a piece of civil rights history to the nation's new African American Museum. But first, here's a look at some important moments in Detroit's Black history.
I'm Ken Coleman with a look back at African American life in Detroit. This week in 1951, neurosurgeon and former U.S. presidential candidate Ben Carson was born. In 1970, Ain't No Mountain High Enough by Diana Ross was the nation's top song. And in 1986, President Ronald Reagan visited Cobo Hall to support Bill Lucas for Michigan governor. These are significant events this week in Detroit's Black history, taken from the book On This Day, African American Life in Detroit.
The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture is going to open its doors to the public next weekend. It's a museum that has been 100 years in the making. Among its nearly 37,000 artifacts is a piece of history from Detroiter Edith Lee Payne. Edith was the 12-year-old girl who was captured in one of the most famous images from the 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington. She stood in the crowd carrying a banner calling for jobs and freedom. This weekend, Edith donated that banner to the new Smithsonian Museum. I spoke with Edith 3 years ago on American Black Journal. She talked then about how she did not learn of the historic photo until 45 years after the march.
I actually discovered that the photo had been taken and was in existence when my cousin was browsing a catalog that contained Black history calendars. And the photos of the calendar, the cover, front and back, showed my picture on the back holding that banner. And she phoned me, she lives in Baltimore, she phoned me, and of course I didn't believe her, because why would I be on a calendar with Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth? So I pulled it up on the website, and sure enough, there was this face that it was still difficult for me to believe. It's me.
It was you.
So I called another friend and asked her to pull up the website and look at it and say, is that me? And so that kind of went on for a while. And
so that had to startle you, though. This just the idea of, you know, pulling up a web page and there's your photo. That's not just a picture on a website, but it's a part of civil rights history.
Right. Well, I didn't know the depth of where that picture was.
Yeah.
She only mentioned to me at the time that it was in a museum. So I started my search first with the Smithsonian and then to the Library of Congress. And it was the Library of Congress that directed me to the National
To the archives, right.
and said where it was. As far as I knew, that was the only place that that photo had been shown until a few months later. I saw it on a documentary done by Antoine Fuqua.
Okay. And do you remember the photo being taken? You had no idea.
No idea.
Yeah. So tell me though about the march. I mean, so you were at the March on Washington in '63, but you were also part of the march in Detroit in 1963.
I was. My mother knew, of course, like the thousands of others that went, that Dr. King was going to be there. We went, and that's when he asked the participants there to join him at the march in Washington.
In Washington, I see.
Because Washington, D.C. is my mother's home.
Okay.
So it's where we went for vacation every year. She decided to schedule our vacation to go then, which also happened to be my birthday.
Okay.
Yeah. August 28th.
August 28th,
Yes,
right. Okay.
yes.
And did you go with a group of people, or was it just...
It was just my mother and I, and we actually left that weekend, and we took a Greyhound bus, the usual bus ride, because she didn't drive. And so we actually left from my aunt's house in Northeast D.C.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And talk to me about being a 12-year-old young lady at this march. I mean, you had to have some sense of the place it would have in history just by the sheer number of people in Washington.
Well, when we attended the march in Detroit a few months earlier, it didn't strike me as being anything historic just because there were a lot of people there.
Right.
I was used to being around a lot of people. I used to go to the Olympia. You know, my mother took me to a lot of things. Never a crowd quite like that, but because Dr. King was more of a Reverend King to me, it was just like being at a huge church service. Okay, and that's kind of how I look at him and respect him then and as well as now. The same for being in Washington. But in that time and hearing what he talked about, the problems in the South,
Sure.
it bothered me because there were children like myself that couldn't do the things that I could do.
So even as a 12-year-old,
Even
you
as a
were
12-year-old.
really aware of that.
Oh, yeah, I was in junior high school at
Yeah.
the time.
Right.
So to know that there were children that couldn't attend school, I went to integrated schools. I lived in an integrated neighborhood in Detroit. We took the bus and sat wherever we wanted to sit.
Right.
And we just lived the dream that Dr. King spoke about. So it was really disturbing to me to know that in this very same country, just a few hundred miles away, people were not able to live under this United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and all those things that we learned about in school.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that bothered me, and I understood his passion.
Yeah. So now you heard the speech twice.
Yes.
Then I mean, you heard it first here in Detroit and second in Washington. Do you remember what your initial reaction was? I mean, it is easily the most famous speech he's ever given, and it's one of the most famous speeches that anyone has ever given. Do you remember feeling like when he gave it that first time? What did it feel like? How did it move you?
The first time, it was exciting to hear because I knew who he was, and I knew what he stood for. The second time, it meant a little more, not just the speech, but the whole environment, because there were so many entertainers there. People that I could equate with that I would see on TV. Mahalia Jackson, for one.
Sure.
And seeing her on the movie Imitation of Life, it was just striking for me to see her standing there singing. Lena Horne was there. She came over and spoke with my mother because they used to entertain together. But Dr. King's voice, it's just something about his voice that just, I don't know, it pierces you. And the way he speaks, it's so much compassion. But his message is also spiritual, and that was something that I could relate to.
Yeah. And so you still have the banner that you were carrying that day in Washington. Here, we'll hold that up for the viewers. That's something. I mean, this is a 50-year-old banner.
Yes, it is.
So tell me how you've managed to hang on to it and keep it in such good condition for all that time.
Well, actually, as most children have to do and say how I spent my summer vacation when you go back to school, I did a report on a poster board and mounted this banner and typed a report on my typewriter that we had back then. Remington Rand, as a matter of fact.
You remember the typewriter brand?
The typewriter, yes. I was so happy to get it. And pictures that I had cut out of the Look or Life magazine. And so it was mounted. And my mother was a keeper. She just kept things. And she passed away 20 years ago. But she still had it. And of course, I kept it.
Wow. Wow. And so now you've got it mounted, and
yes,
you can pass it on to other generations.
Yes,
right?
to my grandchildren.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me a little bit about how the march affected you, the things that you've done. I mean, you've been a civil rights activist your whole life, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. It affected me. It inspired me. Dr. King inspired me. My mother inspired me because of the situations that she encountered in her travels through the South as an entertainer. I knew and always felt, but it was something within me, so it inspired what was in me, that there was a need to do something. Whatever something was wrong, that's just how I was. It had to be right. We had to make it right.
Right.
When I lived in Maryland, I got married, the schools were desegregated, but they wanted them to be segregated again, and I had to fight to keep my children in the schools and
in the integrated
white
schools.
Yes, because the education was better. Everything was better for them.
Yeah.
So even before that, it just inspired me, and of course I continue to do that now in a number of ways.
Right, right. Including you were one of the original challengers to the emergency manager law.
Yes.
And you're a frequent speaker at city council meetings.
Frequent.
Boy,
yes.
that alone should earn you a medal, right? Going down there and putting up with that, right?
Yeah, but our voices have to be heard, and as Dr. King did, he was a voice for the voiceless.
Right.
And that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
That's how we keep his dream and his legacy alive.
That's our program for today. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the Detroit Historical Museum for hosting us. You can get more information about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org, and you can always connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy,